I'm really excited for Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2. As a big Nicktoons fan, I was all over the first game, and the glow-up is insane. I already know I'm picking this up day one. I really want to get my hands on that roguelike campaign thing. Alright, I wanted to start with all the compliments because, yeah, the title isn't lying. Despite my inherent excitement for this game, something about what we've seen just bugs me. Why is that? Well, unsurprisingly, it all comes back to the roster choices. There's an odd pattern happening here. Problems for the first game's roster not quite being solved. But I remember not minding them so much in the first game because the game felt like such a small, passionate effort by a development team that, at least on the gameplay side of things, knew what they were doing. What's there to complain about? The fact that a Nickelodeon crossover platform fighter exists at all is something to be thankful for. Underwhelming graphics and kinda gross art style? No voice acting at launch? Limited content all around? It's clearly a low-budget thing. Let's give the devs the benefit of the doubt. Things will get better as we show our support. Well, now we're at the sequel. Clearly our support has paid for some improvements, but there's something still wrong with the core, and I've decided to take a moment, toss my rose-tinted glasses out, and really examine it. To be clear, I'm glad that the community around Nick All-Star Brawl seems to be very positive about the games overall, enjoying it for what it is rather than going on rants about what it isn't like I'm about to do. It's a great thing, and don't let me take that away from you for a second. And again, I already know I'm picking this game up at launch. I'm gonna be right there enjoying it with you. But this game has been bugging me since it was revealed, and I just need to let it all out. In order to properly examine what's wrong, we're gonna have to go back a bit and dig into what was wrong with the first game's roster, especially now that we know that that roster is in as complete a state as it will ever be. Let's start with the base game. Before updates and DLC, we've got 20 characters from 13 different shows. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Ren and Stimpy, Rugrats, All Real Monsters, Hey Arnold, Cat Dog, The Wild Thornberrys, SpongeBob SquarePants, Invader Zim, Danny Phantom, Avatar The Last Airbender, The Legend of Korra, and The Loud House. 13 shows, 12 universes, since Avatar and Korra are the same world. SpongeBob and Ninja Turtles each get 3 characters, while Ren and Stimpy, Avatar, and The Loud House each get 2. Let's start with the good stuff. The more well-known properties get a little more representation, but overall, a lot of stuff gets in pretty nicely. They seem to cap the number of representatives a show can have at 3, and that works well to make sure they don't overtake the roster. I especially like how they got around the Ninja Turtles situation. Obviously there are 4 turtles, but instead of putting all 4 in and bloating the roster, they put in the 2 most popular ones and slotted in April as the 3rd rep. That works great. I also love the very conscious efforts to make the roster more diverse in gender. I could see why people are bothered by it in certain cases. Sandy over Squidward, Toph over Zuko, Helga over Arnold, Oblina over Ickis or Crumb, and again April over Donatello and Raphael, but I'm a fan of all these choices. Lack of gender diversity is a problem that has persistently plagued the Smash Bros. Roster, so seeing Nick All-Star Brawl directly and consistently combat that issue is commendable. Also, Toph is the best member of the gang, so this all worked out for me. To circle back to the Ninja Turtles for a second, I could see people complaining about their inclusion since they aren't original Nick properties in the first place, but I'm fine with it. Nick has owned and utilized the Ninja Turtles for a long time now. I remember watching the 2012 Ninja Turtles show on Nick and really loving it. They've cemented themselves pretty nicely into the Nick crew, and I don't mind seeing them. Even in their 80s designs. I get it, it's the most recognizable and nostalgic look. Okay, now let's get to the not-so-great stuff. You know how I listed all the represented shows earlier? Well, I actually listed them all in the order that they premiered. Let's set Ninja Turtles aside here since the 80s show wasn't on Nick. SpongeBob acts as a rather convenient cutoff here between the 90s and the 2000s since it premiered in 1999, but obviously kept going long after that. And you know, just for fun, let's also mark where the 2010s start. Right here between Avatar and Korra. Now, I'm no mathematician, but I'm starting to think this section has a lot more stuff on it than the other sections. There are 6 total 90s shows represented on this roster, and that's without SpongeBob. The 2000s, in comparison, get half as much, and the 2010s get even less. Veterans of the channel will know that I get in my feels about era representation in games like this. So it's no surprise that I'm miffed by the very clear bias towards the 90s here. Not to say that any of these shows shouldn't have been represented, absolutely not, they're all great. But the poor 2000s, where's the rest of it? It's especially odd to me because there are way more realizable 2000 shows to choose from than 90s shows. Ignoring compilation shows like Kablam and Oh Yeah Cartoons, there are only 4 90s Nicktoons that aren't in Nick All-Star Brawl, and one of them is currently owned by Disney. Wanna know how many 2000 shows are missing? At least 13, and that's not including Penguins of Madagascar. Don't even get me started on the 2010s. Okay, so there's a 90s bias. Fine. It's not the end of the world. They promised 2 free DLC characters shortly after launch. Sounds like a couple characters they just couldn't get done in time. Those will sort this out. What the hell am I even looking at? Remember how I complimented the devs for restraining themselves when it came to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Well, throw all that out the window. We've got Shredder, a 4th Turtles character. Now I'm actually confused. If you were gonna do 4 Turtles characters anyway, why not just, do the 4 Turtles? This also makes Shredder the only villain on the roster, which feels very odd. Unless you count Helga or Zim, but like, come on. Why is the only Nick villain on this roster from a franchise that didn't originate from Nick? Hell, I'll do you one better. Why is the most represented property on this roster one that didn't originate from Nick? This choice just utterly baffles me. In a vacuum, Shredder's cool, I'm down to play as him, but it just feels so wrong for him to be in here like this. But even then, he's not the roster pick that sticks out the most. I despise this cat. What is he doing here? Yes, I know Nick owns Garfield, that's been made abundantly clear to me. But no, I refuse. This is not a Nick property in any way, shape, or form. It hasn't spent years cementing itself as part of the Nick brand like the Ninja Turtles did. No, this cat just showed up pretending like he's always been here when he's never had an original show on the goddamn network. Nick seems to have just bought this property so they could flaunt it in all their crossover games, and it's gross. Here's the take. Garfield is the antithesis to Nickelodeon. You know the first word that comes to mind when I think of the Nickelodeon brand? Absurdity. Most if not all of their shows live in the world of the absurd. Crazy, wacky ideas that go so off the wall you have to laugh. Ren and Stimpy, Rocko's Modern Life, Angry Beavers, Invader Zim, hell, SpongeBob. They have their slice of life shows, sure, but even something like Hey Arnold you look at and your brain jumps to, why the fuck does his head look like that? He looks fucking weird. Absurdity. It's the lifeblood of Nickelodeon. Garfield? He is the most basic, mild-mannered, tell-it-like-it-is character in existence. His entire appeal is that he is the laziest fucker ever. His stories can be told in 3 panels. It's dry humor. It's, man, it sure feels like my cat is thinking that sometimes. Not to say that any of that is bad, on the contrary, I've gotten a good laugh out of Garfield. But it is not absurd. It is not Nickelodeon. Hell, we can't have Arnold because he's a pacifist and wouldn't fight? Let me ask you this, why on earth would Garfield participate in a fight? I'm not even sure if he put in that much effort to get some lasagna. His whole thing is not doing shit. Not to mention that there was a perfectly good orange cat on the roster already that just by looking at him already screams Nickelodeon 10 times louder than Garfield ever could. Fuck this choice. So things got a little heated there for a sec. Sorry about that. Let's move on to the actual paid DLC. Finally, some good fucking food. All new shows, 2 from the 2000s, 1 from the 90s. We'll take it. I now have to use my entire hand to count all the 2000 shows in this game. How many 2000 shows are still missing? And 90s? Yeah, that's what I thought. Jenny from My Life as a Teenage Robot. Fantastic choice, no-brainer. Rocco of Modern Life fame. Absolutely. Great show. And, Jimmy Neutron's dad. Not actually Jimmy himself. Hoo boy. Okay. Let me admit something here. I'm not a big fan of memes. I just don't really like repetitive humor, and that's like the bread and butter of memes. Pretty much the same joke copied and pasted over and over. Also, let me be clear, I am not better or more intelligent than you in any way because I don't like memes. There are no downsides to liking memes. I am living a worse existence because my sense of humor doesn't usually gel with this. I wish I enjoyed memes. It would make certain friend groups way less awkward to be in. So, when Nigel Thornberry got into the base game, I found it to be a little odd. Might have chortled a bit. Mostly I was just glad anything from the Wild Thornberries got in, cause Nick doesn't tend to give that show a lot of love. I also didn't mind not having Eliza because her design actively terrifies me to this day. So Nigel, sure, it's a fun pick. I can have fun. I'm fun. But Hugh Neutron? Mr. Shadow Realm himself? This one stings. Like, I'm glad anything from Jimmy Neutron is in, but when I think of Jimmy Neutron in a fighting game, I want to whip out a bunch of wacky inventions and use the power of science or whatever to outsmart my opponent. Instead, we're jumping on ducks. And it's funny for a second, sure, but in the long run, I can't help but feel a little betrayed. I have a genuine love for the show Jimmy Neutron, and its representation in this game was reduced to a meme. Great. It's at this point that I think I started to realize something about Nick All-Star Brawl. The 2000s reps, the generation of Nickelodeon that I am the biggest fan of, if you couldn't tell, were just not treated as well overall. I'm not talking about the numbers here. I'm saying the characters that we did get felt more lackluster and like less love was put into them than the 90s characters. I don't really have substantial evidence for this claim, it's just kind of a feeling. Danny Phantom isn't quite doing all the things I'd expect him to do. Neither is Aang. Zim and Toph fare a bit better, but still feel a bit restricted. Jenny feels great actually, no complaints. And then of course there's Hugh, who is kind of just inherently disappointing. I can't help but feel a bit excluded from the party here. This is why I find era representation so important, especially in the context of a network like this where different people have inevitably grown up with very different shows. I hear Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl and I see all the shows I grew up with clashing together, and they're just not really there. And I imagine a lot of people my age or younger probably feel that way. The 90s kids are thriving and we're begging for scraps. So, if you ask me, the first priority for any future edition should be adding more new shows. The scales are hilariously imbalanced and we've got to put a dent in this big old number. Okay, maybe we should actually start talking about the game that's in the thumbnail and title. Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2 had a bombastic reveal trailer that introduced 4 new characters, plus potentially a 5th on the official box art and a 6th a few days later at EVO. So what new shows did they put in to finally give us the 2000s representation we're craving? None. Not a single one. The 6 characters revealed so far are all from shows that were already in the first game. No joke. Now, some of these were very highly requested, namely Squidward and my boy Jimmy Neutron, good on the devs for correcting that travesty. Then we have Donatello and Raphael. Fine. The fact that there's a non-zero chance that there are 6 Turtles characters in this game makes my skin crawl. And then there's something interesting. Plankton and Vlad Plasmius. We technically don't know if he's playable yet since all they've said is that he will be the main antagonist for the campaign, but I don't know, you don't make the guy that big on the box art and not make him playable. The fact that they haven't made a statement disconfirming him makes me think that he's totally playable, and they just want us to be surprised when we unlock him at the end of the campaign. 2 villain characters. Alright, that's cool, certainly more fitting than Shredder was. But aren't our priorities a little off here? We're still missing a lot of shows, several that would really help balance this roster better, but we're sticking with what we've got, huh? This was my bad omen. I didn't know what was coming, but I got a bad feeling after these reveals registered to me. They very distinctly chose not to show off any new brawlers from actually new shows. Sure, more 2000s characters are here, but it's not quite what we're looking for. If this is the route they're taking for the newcomers this game, just sticking to the shows they already have, we're gonna have some problems. And it's at this point that I have to stop and issue a spoiler warning. I've seen the leaks for this game. I, like many others, know full well what the final roster of this game is going to look like, and I kinda have to talk about it. If you're wondering what leaks I'm talking about, go watch PapaGenos videos on the subject. It's where I got my info, link in the description. If you don't want to know about the leaked characters, I suggest you leave now. Hey, I was totally right. Of the 6 remaining newcomers we definitely know about, 4 are from shows already in the game. The 2 that aren't are the Angry Beavers, can't leave a single 90s show untouched apparently, and El Tigre. Okay, that's sick as fuck. I love El Tigre so much, I'm actually so hyped for this. Okay, back to Angry Rambling. The other characters come from Hey Arnold, Danny Phantom, and Avatar. A lot of gender diversity picks here, which I still don't have a problem with. Mostly. Azula over Zuko is great. It expands the potential for a firebender moveset by adding lightning, and that's a great idea. Plus another villain is cool. Ember is a very popular Danny Phantom character, and I am glad she got in, especially if Vlad is also playable. I see no downside to this inclusion. None. None at all. Seems like they're committing very hard to the idea that Arnold is a pacifist, so apparently every other Hey Arnold character under the sun gets to be playable instead. Fine. Hey Arnold is an incredibly popular show, and Gerald is fun. Why not? Gertie, though? Were you guys really struggling that hard to find more female Nick characters to put in? It's a funny pick, sure, but again, priorities. In a vacuum, all these picks are fun, but we're not in a vacuum. We still have a roster that is very obviously heavily leaning towards the 90s. Even if you take into account every individual character and not just the shows like I've been doing, it's... Oh. This is actually significantly better. Sure, there's TMNT and SpongeBob overkill, but the 90s and 2000s actually match up perfectly. And this doesn't even take into account that Gers appeared in a much less definitive leak. Though I should say that we don't know if everyone from the first game is returning. Okay, if everything's technically balanced, why does it still feel so wrong? Is it because it's all concentrated on 2 shows while the 90s gets almost all its shows represented? Yeah, that, probably that. Assuming Doug is just entirely off the table due to copyright, Rocket Power is the last 90s Nicktoon to not be represented on a Nick All-Star Brawl roster. Meanwhile, we're still in the double digits for missing 2000 shows. Like, yes, I love Danny Phantom and Avatar, but that's not all that 2000s Nick is. It feels like the devs either haven't seen, or giving them the benefit of the doubt, aren't being allowed to use certain 2000 shows, so their solution to the error representation complaints from the last game was just to double down on the shows that they can use / are familiar with. This is so bizarre to me. Chalk Zone, Cat Scratch, the X's, hell, even weirder stuff like Back at the Barnyard, Fanboy and Chum Chum, or Tack, and the power of... Okay, maybe not that one. There is so much to pull from, and yet... Alright. I've put it off long enough. I wanted to make my argument as well as I could without bringing up the elephant in the room, but The time has come. I can use numbers and reason to try and logic out what's wrong with this roster, and there is a lot of truth in what we've discussed thus far, but nothing is going to hit quite like the raw emotion of the show that means the most to me. The show that stands alongside SpongeBob and Rugrats as a titan of the network. The show that through its absurdity, imagination, emotion, and yes, even magic, has come to define Nickelodeon to me for as long as I can remember. I am, of course, talking about the Mighty Bee. Where the fuck is the Fairly Odd Parents? You wanna know what the most watched premiere of a Nicktoon is? It's Rugrats All Grown Up. But after that, Fairly Odd Baby. Fairly Odd Parents beat SpongeBob Goddamn SquarePants. That is no small feat. This show goes hard. Where SpongeBob gets all the glory, Fairly Odd Parents hits you with that good shit. An episode can be anything. The wild imagination of a 10-year-old let loose with magical fairy godparents. It's no wonder this show was so popular. Pink and green objects can never be next to each other without an immediate association with Cosmo and Wanda. It is the third longest running Nicktoon ever, only behind SpongeBob and the Loud House, which refused to die. It was a show with, like, lore, themes, character development. At the very least, Abracatastrophe and Channel Chasers were incredibly strong in that department. What am I doing? I don't need to explain to you that Fairly Odd Parents is great. You've probably seen it. You're watching this video for crying out loud. But for those who don't know, this was the childhood show for me. Nothing else came close. I actively resented SpongeBob for taking attention away from the Fairly Odd Parents. It is a show that is near and dear to me, and despite it running itself into the ground later on, I still find great comfort in returning to it every now and then. So, the immense pain I feel to see a game titled Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2, mind you, and Fairly Odd Parents is still missing. And I know there's some rights issue with some BS company that handles distribution or whatever the fuck. Frankly, I don't care. We supported the first game. The budget is here. We can see it on the damn screen. Whatever hoops you have to jump through, whatever people you gotta pay to make it happen already. And all this just for one character when, if it were up to me, we'd be on our 5th Fairly Odd Parents character by now. Timmy with Cosmo and Wanda, Vicky, Jorgen, Crocker, Mark Chang, the Crimson Chin, Dark Laser, Foop, Tootie. I will take Tootie. There is so much potential being squandered here. And I swear, if it's being saved for the DLC, I'm gonna scream. I'm not usually one to complain about a price tag, but $25 feels like a lot for 4 characters. And this whole, if you get this bundle, you can get exclusive costumes BS just fries my brain, cause now I'm torn. I want to get the game physically, but I want it to be as complete as possible, but these costumes are locked behind digital version bundles. It makes me upset, to say the least. Anyway, the point of this big Fairly Odd Parents rant was to express that, for someone out there, the Nicktoon that means as much to them as Fairly Odd Parents means to me still isn't in the game. Whether that be any of the 2000s ones I listed, or the poor 2010s Nick fans who are really getting shafted here. Why not put in Tough Puppy, or Sanjay and Craig, or Harvey Beaks, or Bunsen is a Beast, or Glitch Tex? Believe it or not, children are playing this E10 and up game, but we're catering to the 90s fans. Okay, sure. So yeah, I'm excited to try out Vlad and Azula, but I really feel like the priorities of this roster shouldn't be in the shows that are already in. And that inclusion like Gertie especially is such a slap in the face. Like, come on, you couldn't find any new show to fill that space? If these base roster choices are anything to go by, I have very little faith that the DLC will be entirely new shows. And even if it is, then I have no doubt that one of those spots will go to Rocket Power, and the whole DLC will still just be a band-aid over these issues. Does all of my complaining just stem from my being butthurt about no Fairly Odd Parents? That is a very real possibility. But I have to imagine I'm not the only person who feels this way. The Nick All-Star Brawl 2 roster is lacking, and the priorities displayed by the choices make me worry that even after the DLC, this is still not going to feel like a true All-Star cast. I'm being a bit hyperbolic, again, I'm getting this game day one, and there's no doubt that I'm going to have a blast, but it will unfortunately be tainted with that twinge of disappointment. I'm not even sure just Fairly Odd Parents' DLC would even fix it at this point. It might be too late for that kind of solution. But you know what might? Okay, quick side tangent, let's think about Smash Brothers. There are a lot of games represented through the fighters, but not every Nintendo property could possibly be represented. So what did they do? They made collectible trophies to fill in the blanks. And even better, they added assist trophies later on for an even more tangible inclusion. I think Nick All-Star Brawl 2 should absolutely steal this shit from Smash. If shows like Chalk Zone or Cat Scratch are too niche to get fighters, why not give them some kind of low-effort collectible? You could even use this to represent things like the babies from Rugrats, since making them fighters would be weird to say the least. I honestly think this would go a long way towards making the game feel more complete. I'd still be upset if Fairly Odd Parents was relegated to this sort of status, I'm just not willing to compromise there, but everything else? Yeah, this might be alright. And you know, credit where credit's due, I'm focusing so much on the big number of shows that aren't in, but there are 6 great 2000 shows being well represented here, which isn't actually that far from the number of 90s shows, 8. As I said up top, I'm somewhat reductively focusing on what isn't in the game rather than what is. But I can't really help it when what isn't in the game sticks out so much to me. When I saw the Nick All-Star Brawl trailer, I was a bit disappointed, and that feeling is valid. I'm talking in circles now, so thanks for watching. Sorry for being a downer, I guess. I hope I didn't ruin your hype for the game or anything. I'm really happy people are still excited about this, and Nickelodeon Talk on the Internet has never been more active, which is always a treat. I'm still hyped as hell for El Tigre, new main for sure. This is YouTuber's first dedicated negative video, and it's not really something I want to keep doing at all. This specifically was just something I needed to get off my chest. If you're new, I've got a much more positive video about the Nick Picks DVDs, as well as a bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with Nickelodeon at all. Ooh, let's try this. I wish the person watching this would like the video and subscribe to the channel. Did it work? Pretty sure fairy law demands that you comply here. Alright, this is where I put a good line to end the video.
If I had one,